Hey makers, it's Jen with Minerva. Today I'm going to be stitching up the Megan Nielsen Olive Blouse. This pattern actually features a dress version as well, but I'm going to be sticking with the top. It's a relaxed fitting blouse, comes in two different lengths, and has a really cute V insert detail. It's just a really great overall top that I really think is a simple make and something that everybody should have in their closet. All right, I'm super excited. Let's get going. Today I'm going to be cutting into this double cotton gauze. It's 100% cotton, and once I pre-washed it, the texture of this fabric really comes out and shines. I do recommend pre-washing really any fabric, but especially cotton fabric. This way you allow for shrinkage so that you don't make this really great top, and then after you first wash it, it shrinks and becomes too small. So take it from me, do pre-wash your fabric. Cotton gauze is known for its fabulous crinkle appearance, which means it does have just a little bit of stretch. Not enough to make any major pattern changes, but something to consider while sewing because it also loves to grow on you. I'm going to be using the Megan Nielsen Olive pattern and stitching up the blouse version. This top is a really great classic shape, and being white, it's going to be a go-to item in my closet. There's actually two different hem lengths for the top, which was something that was sort of a hidden surprise once I opened the pattern. I'm going to go with a shorter length, which is sort of my new favorite style. All right, makers, let's get started. I want to show you guys with the bias binding piece. If you're ever running short on fabric and maybe you can't quite fit these on the grain, you can actually go kind of quarter grain if you wanted. This still allows the fabric to stretch a little bit like you would need for a bias binding, but uses significantly less fabric. And it's often used to kind of conserve fabric when you need something that's needs a bias stretch, but don't necessarily have all the space for something that's bias cut. You know, this is definitely something you could use on a binding. I wouldn't recommend it on a full garment if you're going for a full bias cut dress. But a little trick in case you are trying to play pattern Tetris and can't quite fit this in your yardage, you can always kind of shift it this way. Okay, let's get started with this front V insert. It's just this front part that's going in the front of the shirt. And because this has a little bit of stretch to it, it's just kind of the weave of the fabric. I am going to use the form band bias tape. So this just allows for some stability along this edge of the neckline so that it doesn't stretch out while we're sewing. So I'm going to just measure across. If you want, you could use your pattern piece to make sure that it's the right length. And I'm going to hop on over to the iron, and these have little glue dots on the back, just like an interfacing does. And I'm going to glue or iron this into place. While I'm at the iron, I'm going to go ahead and fold this top piece down by 3/8, give it a press, and then fold once again. Okay, so we applied our bias tape in the interior of our V insert, and then we folded it down and folded it down one more time, both 3/8 of an inch each time. So we're eventually going to be top stitching this down, but before we do, let's grab our front piece and we're going to be adding the same bias tape along here just because we don't want this to stretch too much. So this kind of helps keep this all in place while we are stitching in our V-neck. Okay, so I'm going to hop back on over and I'm going to apply the same bias tape along the edges. Okay, let's talk about our pocket. So we need to press this down with the iron 3/8 of an inch and then again 1 inch. And then we're going to be top stitching along this edge to attach it. We also turned back all along all the other edges 3/8 of an inch so that we can attach this to the shirt. So I went ahead and marked where our pocket is going with some pins here. And once we top stitch along this, we can place this where the pins are, and we're going to top stitch the pocket in place. Wondering what thread I'm using? It's Gutermann color 800. Okay, we got our pocket on, and I also added some very narrow stitching in the, just on the inside of the seam allowance at the bottom of this V part. I usually use like like a size 1, something that's very, very narrow. And what we're going to do is we are going to be clipping into this V, and it's going to help us stitch this next part. So we're going to clip all the way to that stitching, but not through the stitching. And this way it will kind of hold that shape for us when we stitch, and it won't get too stretched out or anything like that. So we have our V insert. We went ahead and top stitched the hem of the top of it, and we're going to be placing it inside the seam allowance. I actually like to do this with the shirt on top. And so what we're going to be doing is matching over here. And we're going to be matching at the notch and placing it down here. And we're going to be stitching from the top all the way down. And we're going to be stopping at the bottom of this V, right where we stitched before, just on the outside of it. We're going to keep our needle in the down position. Then we are going to lift up our presser foot and shift this around. And when we shift this around, we're gonna have kind of all this fabric. This is why I like to have this part on top. So we're gonna kind of move this around and move this over, and our needle will be right here. And then we will stitch the remainder of this seam. And when we're done with this, we'll have this really nice, clean point edge on the right side. All right, let's go try that. Check out this really great looking V here. We stitched with the top up on top, and then we stitched down. We kept our needle in the down position. We lifted our foot. We pivoted around, moved all of this fabric out of the way, put our presser foot back down, and then stitched all the way back up, all in one step. And it creates this really, really nice V. I haven't even pressed this and it already looks great. So let's get the back of our bodice with our front. So we are going to take our back and we are going to place it right sides together, and we're going to be stitching along each shoulder seam from neckline all the way over to our shoulder. We sewed up each of our shoulder seams, and now it's going to be time to work on finishing the neckline. We are going to grab our binding pieces. You should have cut 4 of them. And one by one, we're going to be placing them along the edges, and we're going to be sewing at a 45-degree angle. So that means we're going to be sewing from this corner all the way down to this corner, and it'll open up and be a nice bias piece. And we'll continue that for the additional 4 pieces. Okay, we got all of our bias binding ready. So what I did is I clipped my seams here, and then I pressed them open, and then I folded my entire bias binding in half. So we're going to get this onto the shirt. And how we're going to do that is we're going to start with one side. And with essentially the right sides together, kind of all looks like the same, but we are going to overlap this by about 1.5 inches. You can do a little bit extra if you want, but about 1.5 inches is all you need down here. And what we're going to do is we are going to be stitching this binding all the way around the neckline. Then it will end over here, like so. And then once we have this attached, we can trim this off. This will be a little extra, it'll be longer than you need it, but we're gonna start from the tip of the bottom of the V, and then we're gonna stitch out towards the edge of the binding. Again, this is important to make sure that this is only 1.5 inches. If you added a little bit extra, go ahead and just trim it off, but you're going to start from the V over here and a diagonal line out. Okay, let's stitch that up. Okay, we attached the bias binding all around the neckline. And this is what I mean by at this beginning of this V, we actually stitched a diagonal line from the end of the V all the way to the edge of the bias binding. And then I trimmed off whatever I had left. We are going to now trim off some of this excess seam allowance, and then this will turn nicely and have a nice clean finish. So let's trim this off. Okay, so we gave this a trim. I'm going to hop on over to my machine, and I'm actually going to understitch this binding to the seam allowance. And then I'm going to give all of this a quick press after that. What we're going to do for this bottom of the V area though, when you're giving it a press, we're going to be tucking this under and meeting where the V is, kind of like so. And you can actually trim this off if it's a little bit long. You want this maybe a little bit shorter because we want this V to kind of come down and around. You can always trim a little bit off, but I always like to press it first and then trim it so that you just have a little bit of space to fold everything back. So let's add our understitching along the bias binding and seam allowance, and then we'll give everything a press, and then we are going to be stitching the bias binding down and around. Oh my gosh, could this neckline look any better? Because we were able to use this bias tape, it really kept this neckline from stretching out, because this fabric has like a really nice kind of bouncy stretch to it, even though it's a woven. So it just really helped keep this just nice and clean and smooth. So I highly recommend getting the bias tape. All right, let's get these side seams together. So we're gonna put our shirt right sides together, and we are gonna be stitching the side seams top to bottom, both sides. While we're there, let's go ahead and do the armbands. So you should have had 2 armbands, and we're going to fold them in half, and we're going to stitch down the short ends. Okay, so we stitched up our side seams, both of them, and added some seam finishing. Now we are going to turn this right side out. And we also stitched up the armband. So I went ahead and pressed open the seam and I turned up part of the hem allowance. So we're going to place this matching the seam of the cuff or the band to the side seam. And we're going to place this around the armhole. And now we'll stitch around the armhole. The armband is stitched on. We pressed our seam allowance towards the armband, and then we folded the armband in to match where that stitch line is so that there's a folded line here. Now we're going to be stitching along the armband and attaching this interior piece to it. So I went ahead and did it over here for you to see. So as you can see, we stitched this down and it connected these two pieces. While I was pressing, I went ahead and got a jump start on the hem of our shirt. So we're just going to be doing a simple double turn hem. So I folded up 3/8 of an inch and folded up 3/8 of an inch again and gave everything a press. And now we can just stitch around and our hem will be finished, and so will our top.